What's going on, guys? I'm Dan Newton and this is Behind the Chalkboard. In today's world, education establishments are run just like businesses, and I've made it my mission to meet the people behind the scenes and dig deep into what it really takes to make a successful education business. If you think you'd be a good guest, drop me an email at dn@charlesgarth.com. Enjoy the episode. Jonny, welcome to Behind the Chalkboard. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
It's appreciated. As always, with these podcasts, we like to know a little bit about you, introduction, and your story into education.
Okay, well, I'm Jonny Coates. I currently work for NPCAT, which is a Catholic multi-academy trust in North Yorkshire, Teesside, in the city of York. Story into education is probably a bit of a long-winded one. So I left school at 17. I was basically going to go on to university to either be a PE teacher, but then I wanted to be a police officer, and then I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. But I was actually at sixth form, and somebody kind of accosted loads of us on the way between lectures and said, there's a career at Northern Rock, which is a bank local to Newcastle, where I'm from. And there's a career in financial services. You know, do you want to find out more about it? So it was a bit of a careers day, and really that was in December, January time. I was 17 years old, didn't know what I wanted to do, and by the March they'd offered me a job. So I went from sixth form doing English language, literature, PE, stuff like that, to literally just working at 17. So I was in the bank, and I honestly thought that was going to be my life from then, because I had some great opportunities, made some great friends, and learnt loads about the sector of financial services. So the pathway I was going to take was management accounting. So that was what I was going to do through SEMA. But due to several sort of issues in the banking sector, 2007 and 8, I kind of realised that wasn't a viable option at the time, and everything got put on hold. So I kind of made a bit of a jump to a building society, which I thought would be safer than a bank, because I don't have shareholders. It's more of a mutual situation. And I went there and was there for a year, but I was managing third-party finance, which was like international banking. So one of the banks from Iceland went bust while I was there. So there's a bit of a theme of me working in financial services, where maybe it's not it's not ideal, is it? So that only lasted a year, and to be honest, I learned loads from there as well. Totally different organisation, but I had a bit of a passion for finance, and I thought, this is what I want to do. But I didn't know what the future held, and I was quite young. I had a mortgage, and I just thought, I don't know really where I'm going to go next. So I ended up randomly in the DWP, so Department for Work and Pensions, okay, for the sort of local government stuff, government but locally, as in the job centres. And I was supporting people with outreach who basically been made redundant from factories, been there for 30 years, never had a job interview, and then all of a sudden the factories are closing, and pretty much like when the mines closed, what do we do? There was no support back then. They were trying to bridge that gap. So I was helping people find work, and came across the school business manager's role during that process, really, of helping somebody apply for a role in Durham. And I was interested in it. I didn't know what it was, to be honest, but through helping somebody apply, I found out a bit more about it. And I was at a bit of a crossroads, because I didn't want to be doing, working for DWP was a great job, but I didn't see it as a long-term career, because it was signposting, it was helping with CV writing, it was employability support and training. It was good. So I got the sort of first bug for training back then, which is when I like supporting people, like to see them train and develop. But there was no finance, there was no business really. It was purely down to employability. So I just took the plunge and thought, well, I've seen that job, I'll look out for them in the future. And a couple of jobs came up near where I live, really, in small primary schools. So I applied for them and thought, I'm going to get there, and they're going to just laugh and say, you're too young, you don't know what you're doing working in a school. But I ended up landing a job. It was March 2000. What year was it? 2010. So coming up 15 years ago now. I got a job, and it was term time only. And I thought, this is a dream, because it was the first business manager role they'd ever created in that school. So within that, you have obviously finance. Then there was a bit of building stuff, a little bit of line management, but not very much. It was small. IT infrastructure was through the local authority, and there was a chance to kind of shape that a little bit. But it was all brand new. So I went in there, and the first thing I kind of noticed was it was really archaic. Even when I was at school, I thought things were back sort of 10 years earlier were probably a little bit slow. It was even worse than that. So everything was done on paper. So all the finances were done using 2 or 3 sheets of A3 paper stuck together with sellotape on the back, and lines going across. And I thought there's got to be a better way. So 2010 there wasn't really a lot of digital stuff, and I'm really big on kind of trying to make things more efficient. So I put everything on Excel, and that was a starting point. So I made a little bit of made a bit of a name in the network group because I was coming up with these ideas and I was sharing them with colleagues who've been in the trade for 20 years, 15 years, and they're like, oh well, we don't do it like that, we do it like this. But I thought, but long term, I thought this is a better way of doing it. So I kind of I linked up with a couple of people who had been in school business management for about 20 years, 15 years, I'd say, learned more about the role, and they took me under the wing a little bit, and said, this is a big career for you. If you can do that in a small school, you need to be looking at bigger schools, and you need to think about secondary. So I thought, all right, I'll have a look at a bigger primary, and that's where I started. So a couple of years later, I joined a bigger primary school. They had a sports complex, and the idea was to market that and do the sports side. So I loved that because I'm into football, and the gym was in there, and it was really good. So I did that for a couple of years, and I got really comfortable for probably 5 years, really, and thought, what am I going to do? Because I've now done everything I need to do over the last 7 years in primary school, but I really want to progress my career. So I looked for roles in secondaries, and the best piece of advice I got was from a head teacher she was due to retire the year after. And she said, I don't want rid of you, Jonny, but if you're going to do something with your career, you need to start looking now for a job, because I'll give you a great reference because you've done some good stuff for me, but you need the biggest job you can find out there, no matter where it is, location wise, and you need to apply for it, and you need to get it. I was like, all right. So tongue in cheek, I thought she was joking, but she actually wasn't. She was deadly serious, and I did what she said. I found a job in the Guardian newspaper, and it was in London, and it was Hyams Park, and it was a huge sort of role. So I'd gone from a budget of $1 million where I was at, and it was $1.5 million, so $2 million towards the end, and this was like sort of 10 to 12 million. So the portfolio size was much bigger, and it was a secondary with a sixth form in the middle of London. Never even been to London really, and I applied for it, and I thought there's not a chance to kind of.
Did you get it?
Well, the story with that is I didn't get it, but I got down to the last 3, and then 9 months later they realised that they did want me to work there, so I got offered the job twice more, but circumstances meant I couldn't go. But what it did for me really in terms of confidence was, well, I can do the bigger job. I was totally out of my depth, really. You're talking, I was 28, 29, and I was really out of my depth, even going for the interview, navigating the tube, even getting from Newcastle to London and King's Cross, and then finding the tube station, that was a challenge. So but no, I enjoyed the kind of the buzz about that, what that looked like. So within about 6 months after that second job, after the job offered me twice, I couldn't take it for various reasons, but I applied for a one in Durham, and I got that, and that was a secondary, and it was probably half the size of the one in London, so it's about £5 million budget. But when I got there on day one, I'd done all my homework on the role, and I knew there was an in-year deficit of £500,000, but I didn't know there was a deficit cumulatively of another 3 million. So that was a shock on day one, and I had to sort of unpick all of that. So I got thrown into the deep end with that job, and I just kind of never looked back from that moment, because I had all the financial experience, which I think is really important as a business manager, especially in a school that didn't have a lot of nous internally in terms of finances. So I had a blank canvas there. They had all these issues financially. They potentially, going bust's not a thing you hear with schools, but they were literally bust. Yeah. They were asking the cabinet of the local authority to write the debt off. They can't do that, but they asked that so that they could start again as such. But the only route out of that was to academise, to either join a MAT or form a MAT, but they couldn't form a MAT because they had debt, so they had to join a MAT that would take the debt on, right. But then the council would then look at sort of writing the debt off. A lot of complicated stuff went on, so I got involved with just various things because the local authority recognised that I could help them with the deficit. I balanced the budget in 2018. The 2017-18 budget was balanced for the first time since 2006. I made some big decisions in terms of what needed to be cut. A lot of that was leadership, some teaching staff, and it went down very well, as you can imagine, and lots of internal wrangling. But ultimately, the governors backed the fact that it needed to be sustainable. So the local authority loved that, because there's finally somebody's come in and actually looked at the finances from a more of a strategic point of view and how we move forward. So I did a lot of work with the local authority, and they were desperate for them to find an academy sponsor. Through that process, I didn't actually get to academise that school, but I went to another school in the same local authority that was in a similar position. Their debt was about $1 million cumulative, so it wasn't as bad. And it was right at my doorstep. I was travelling 45 minutes, 50 minutes some days, and I was literally going to go 10 minutes down the road to help a local school with other challenges. Now, this school was a history of about 100 years old. An academy up the road had been built for 3 out of 4 schools that should have merged, and this one particular school just fought it and said they're not going to join the multi-academy trust at that point. They were going to stand alone, and I think they were left on their own in terms of the facilities. So that's when I got really stuck into the facility side as well as the business side. So it was a finance director's role, but had all the premises management, HR, IT, all included. So the building was, I'd say, it was 100 years old. It needed investment of about £1 million. Nobody was willing to give them that investment. So it was a local authority's problem. So the government wouldn't help because it was the council who needed to deal with it. Yeah. Council wouldn't, because they should have joined the Academy Trust up the road. So there's lots of that going on. But ultimately, the problem with that school was it wasn't safe, wasn't fit for purpose, and the kids of Durham, no matter where they're from, they were suffering. So we put a case together as a governing body, and me leading that from with the head teacher support. And we basically fought them and said, we will, in order to academise, so the school needed to academise because it had a inadequate Ofsted judgment. So it got an academy order, but they couldn't academise until they sorted the building issues out. Couldn't sort the building issues out because they couldn't get the money. So it was this sort of chicken and egg and vicious cycle. But we went round with the local authority with a bit of a case and said, this is a problem. We don't really think it's fair that these pupils in Durham haven't got facilities, they haven't got toilets, they haven't got heating, they haven't got windows that close. It's horrendous, to be honest. And then they didn't have a fire alarm system, which was a nail in the coffin, because that is health and safety, isn't it? In terms of, if there is a fire, there's going to be severe consequences. So they did listen. They put some money in, and as a result of that, the government said, well, if you academise, we'll now give you money to fix the window issues. Because the building wasn't listed, but it was really old stone building. It needed lots of work doing. So I got a significant grant to sort of repair the windows, to replace all of those. And then the academy conversion happened, which I led on that process. The sponsor who took the school on was then able to inject some money because everybody else had. Yep. So that is the kind of the story of how I ended up in an academy. And from there was 3 schools that went to 5 schools, an academy trust of 5 schools. And I then got the role of chief operating officer for the 5 schools. And it was a good sort of time, really, in terms of being able to renovate schools, modernise them. We had a brand new build on the go, which was government funded project. So I was involved with that. So I was doing lots of different things really across the trust. And that was 2019 to 2022. Yep. And then I joined the current role I'm at now, which is Nicholas Postgate, Catholic Academy Trust. So we've got 38 schools. I joined in February 22. So, no, what year are we? February 23.
24, so last year.
Last year, 18 months ago. I've lost track of time on that. But yeah, so February 23, I joined NPCAT.
Yep.
Totally different, because the role's different. What I do now is far different to what I did before. Yeah. Much bigger scale. Yeah. And that's how I ended up in education and so where I've been.
Wow, so you've been in a long time, from your finance days to now being in education. You've been in education way longer than what you were involved with in finance. Yeah. But I guess you took the skills from the early days to then implement into the business side of it. So with the trust that you're at now, 38 schools, is that on par with obviously the London job that mentioned?
Yeah, no, so our portfolio size in terms of the budget we have to manage as a trust is sort of over 80 million, so it's much bigger, but the resources obviously have to go a lot further with 38 schools. Some schools have got under 100 pupils. Some have got over 1,000. And then geographically, we have a lot of rural schools in there, North Yorkshire particularly. So,
and you're supporting the schools individually as well. Every school have got their own business manager, have there?
So they have access to a business manager. So my role is head of business and financial support services. So we have business managers across the 38 schools. So there's 22 business managers. We've put a structure in place. So there's a regional business manager who manages a group of business managers and supports them. So every school's got access to business management support. They've also got access to estates support, which is my colleague Jim, his department. And they've all got access to finance. So Helen runs the finance, the actual sort of financial management and reporting side. So in terms of the central services, we provide a service to the schools that previously you would probably imagine local authorities would have provided that service. So we do everything we can in-house. So we've got our own IT team, so head of IT, head of estates, head of financial management reporting, governance, data. Then there's my role. There's HR, and we have a football academy as well. So there's a lot of kind of work goes on the central team to support the schools and the school leaders with education side. So we provide the services from a sort of corporate services side. So the business of education is huge. It's a role that's obviously developed over years, but it is effectively a company that runs schools. But we're here for the purpose of serving education, and making sure that we do everything we can that pupils end up with the best access to resources, facilities, everything. That's our role. It's to make sure that happens. And there are no excuses on that. You have to make sure that you put them first.
Yeah, absolutely. It is full business, isn't it? You're literally running a company, and I think that I realised that, when I kind of did more work within the education world, 7-8 years ago, and I was like, these guys are literally running it as a business model. And now today, you've got business managers, you've got finance managers. When I was at school, there was none of that, And same with you, we had a head teacher, and that was, everything was local authority. We're all run by that. And it's great to see it. But comes with that is then that you don't always get the right people in that understand business. They understand education, but they don't understand business. And you kind of get this scenario where it's like, well, I've worked in education for 50 years. It's like, they're so different.
There's a risk, isn't there, I suppose, with when you get to a certain size, there are different requirements. So when I was at school, as you say, you were at school, there probably wasn't a business manager. Well, I didn't know there was a business manager at my school, but I went to a school in Newcastle. It was a big school, about 1,400 pupils, the sixth form as well, about 300. And there was a guy who I now know was the business manager, but his role was a geography teacher. So he was a geography teacher by day and a business manager by night, probably, that sort of all role. And he did everything to do with sort of the budgets. He worked with all the subject leads in terms of English, maths, science to give them the budget and monitor that. And he then looked at the state. So when the school got extended, he managed the project. When there was a HR issue, we outsourced that, but he coordinated. I didn't know all this existed at the time, but when I kind of first became business manager, that role actually came up in that school as the finance and business sort of director.
The school you went to?
Yeah, and I didn't go for the job. I'd only been in my role for about 9 months, and that's when I kind of did some bit of digging and found out that actually he was there. He'd retired, but I mean, he was ancient when I was there. But I think he'd been in education, they say, about 42 years, and he's pure sort of progression from geography teacher just to business manager, without, as you say, having any business knowledge experience. It worked because they had the local authority support. They weren't an academy. I think there's a misconception in the world around what it means to be an academy. If you're an academy, you're under a lot more scrutiny than a maintained school. You've got a separate company that are subject to regulation. But there's a lot of financial regulation. There's a lot of non-financial regulation now as well, and that has to be managed by professionally qualified people. It's the same as any other kind of industry you'd expect. If you go to hospital, you get a surgeon that they're qualified in their particular role. You've got anaesthetists that they're qualified in their particular role. Everyone's got a part to play. School leaders, in terms of ours, we've got a fantastic team of school leaders who are supported by the central team, and that's what we're there for. Allow them to focus on teaching and learning, and make sure the kids have got the best access to that and the best outcomes at the end with all the support that's needed. but they can only do that with everybody working as a team, and that's where the business side comes in. But it's a huge undertaking, because I say all those different departments I mentioned before, they've all got teams of people doing different roles, and all they're all working at capacity. It's a really busy, sort of fast-paced environment. And people think everyone gets a 6 weeks holidays off. Well, in the business side, it doesn't matter. And even teachers, they've got to do training, they've got to do planning for the next year. It isn't quite as it seems. It's quite an intense role. It's intense during the term. You do need a break sometimes at holiday periods, but it's not as easy as it looks from the outside looking in when you hear on the news that people get all these holidays. They don't. They've got to do a lot of work, and we see that behind the scenes.
It's not like holidays that we got, is it, when we were at school?
Yeah,
6 weeks
you just
off.
don't come back to you.
It felt like 6 years, didn't it?
It's always too long, isn't it?
I couldn't believe they were even back. I was like, they're back already?
Yeah.
Like when we were kids, 6 weeks holidays.
It was brilliant, wasn't it?
Oh, it was lasting forever, didn't it?
Yeah.
On the business side, I'm really interested in business and how things can flow and operate. You mentioned about Excel spreadsheets. You'd come in, you were talking about, putting things on Excel before. Systems in businesses are super important. Running 38 schools is tricky. How do you make sure everyone's heard? And is there a system in place that people can kind of use to get to you for questions?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've got to say the team that's there has got split into various departments. They all have a direct link to a school. So if it's a HR department, they've got a HR advisor for that school. If it's finance, they've got a finance partner. If it's business, they've got a business manager. Estates, they've got the estates lead on site, whether it's a secondary campus manager or access to a facilities manager. So they've got access to all of that. And in terms of me directly, we've got a team. So I've got probably a team of around 130 employees that all work in schools, just on the business side.
Yep.
I also look after some other teams that are remote working, such as Exchequer Services, so accounts payable mainly is their role. They've all got access to one-to-one. So basically there's a line management structure. So my direct reports will be the regional business managers. They'll have their own business managers that they support. On their teams, they've got the business support function, which was previously known as the admin in schools. So they all work centrally. They all work for the business manager, who will report to the regional business manager, who report to me. But what we do in our trust, something that I was quite keen to set up when I joined, was an enhanced forum, which is where the business teams can get together once every half term, so every 6 weeks or so, in an environment where it's kind of a bit relaxed, but you can give them some messages in terms of important information, some key updates, but actually look at the networking side. Networking is something that is really important in education. So why would we go external to network and neglect the internal networking? So both are as equally as important as each other, really. So what we brought in was an internal network where the business team could sort of network, collaborate, share ideas, best practice, do some training together. So we brought in quite a few different things like coaching, mentoring schemes. We did some of the pathway stuff, which is for aspiring business managers now. So we brought in training qualifications, mentoring, so they can all basically feed into that. So every department's got access to sort of feeding into that, how that should look. That's coordinated with a trust development manager who looks after CPD, is one of her roles. She's fantastic. So that's Helen's role, Helen Bell. She's been key support in this, really. And it's about upskilling those people and allowing them to develop. But if they need access in terms of support for whatever reason, they've always got somebody they can go to. So the line management structure works quite well, and I get a lot of feedback on that. And sometimes it doesn't work, and you have to go back and review it, and you have to make some sort of adjustments along the way. But what we try and do is listen as a trust, and that's something in terms of leadership, you have to listen. You don't always have the right idea. I've always got an idea. I've always got something where I think this is what needs to happen, but actually practically can it happen? And one of the key things I think in education is you probably need to have worked in a school at some point to be able to lead a function like this, because it's different on the ground to what it is in an office or somewhere where you're not connected necessarily with schools. So one of the things I did when I first joined the trust was make sure I visited every single school, so 38 schools, and it took 3 months to get around them all because just geographically it was really tricky times. But I could get the context, understand where they are, what challenges they face, and meet the school leaders, meet the staff on the ground. And then the business managers, when they're talking to you and talking to their line manager, they've then got a better understanding of what goes on in that school. So not every school's the same. Every context's got to be taken into account. And a school in York's very different to a school in Middlesbrough. School in Middlesbrough is very different to school in Thornaby. It's all different. So that's why we listen, and we take sort of great pride in that, I think, as a trust, that we actually listen to what people need. As I say, we don't always get it right, but we always look to improve and take that feedback every year. Really, things change hopefully for the better.
It's a great trust. I think even from the top down, social media is a big part of your work. I see there's constantly praise going out for the work that you do, and it is from the outside in. It looks it looks like it's going well. It looks like it's going really well, and I guess it's a trust that everyone's proud of and being involved with.
It is. I mean, it is a huge trust. I think from the CEO himself, it's a family of schools led from the top, and that's how it should be. There isn't really another trust like it that I've seen, where, in terms of how it intricately works inside the trust, it's got a good ethos. It's got good values. It believes in the right thing, and the right thing is to make sure the children are receiving what they need, and we always put those pupils at the centre of everything that we do. It isn't without its challenges. Of course, you're going to get things wrong, and of course, things aren't going to go quite as planned. But you're dealing with people, you're dealing with human beings as well. So you have to have empathy, and you have to, take into account their position. Their position might not be aligned to yours, but you've got to explain why and what can we do then to be on the same page? How can we meet in the middle, compromise, those type of things? And that's what we do as a trust. And I know some trusts don't operate like that, and they do a very different model, and that works for them. But my experience from the trusts I've worked in now, this one does things very different to my previous trust. They both do things really well, but it's just different, isn't it? I suppose the scale of it being 38 schools is a challenge, a daily challenge, because you've got to keep a lot of people happy, motivated, and recruitment and retention is a big issue in every part of education. And we've got those opportunities internally where hopefully people don't need to think about looking outside of the organisation, because we've got the opportunities there.
Create the system inside, just on the finance things of it. Obviously, you've got a finance background, and in the world of education, we tend to not teach finances. So when you joined from finance background into education, was there any part of you that thought we need to be teaching about finances from earlier on? And has work been done to improve that?
Yeah, so when I was in primary school, it wasn't really something that I thought about, to be honest. But when I got into the secondary role, so 2017, there was a huge gap between sort of year 9 and year 11. So when kids are just about to leave school by year 11, they don't know anything about a bank account. When I was at school in year, I think it was year 6, I was 11, I remember opening a bank account and finding out about what it means to have a bank account, a kid's bank account. But this is what happens, and then you've got a savings account. None of that seemed to happen at all in the kind of modern era as it now is. So when I was at that particular school, I just raised the issue. I was on the leadership team of the school, and I just said, what are we doing about this? And to be honest, I was quite surprised by the reaction I got. So they were really open to wanting children to have access to that, but they didn't have anybody to deliver the sessions. So I was like, all right, okay, so what is it we're looking for? Well, they need to know about mortgages, they need to know about savings, they need to know about how do you buy a car, how do you pay a bill, what's a direct debit, what's a bank account. And they just looked at me and said, well, you've worked in banks, haven't you, Johnny? You can just do that. And I was like, well, I probably can, I'll have a go. But there was when I did a bit of research, there was Money Matters, who would an organisation who actually have content that you can deliver to children aged between 11 and 16, depend on the audience. You've got the content. So I tried my hand, I would say, loosely speaking, at teaching, and I did that for a couple of terms, and it was a couple of times a week. It took a lot of time, and that's when I found out actually, there's a huge gap. There's a huge gap in knowledge.
What were you in at? Were you a money teacher?
I was a business manager, so the kind of basically just sidestepped that to business sort of teacher. But it was,
you were doing teaching for the business
teaching.
side.
I had the finance manager from the school there as well, so she joined me for the sessions, and she had a longer banking background than I did. Since the 80s she'd been there, so 20 odd years of solid experience in a bank. So she was there to support sessions as almost my teaching assistant, I suppose. It was really bizarre because I never ever thought I would stand in front of a class and actually teach stuff to them. But the engagement levels were I was shocked and surprised and really pleased really with, first of all, the engagement, and then actually the feedback I got from the kids, and they actually really want to learn about it. So we did it for a couple of terms. and it just became really popular. And now they actually do teach it in some schools in the PHSE, which is a kind of a social, not social, but it's the part of the curriculum that is not it doesn't come with any exams. It's kind of everything else basically. So the PHSE stuff is now taught, some financial stuff in there, but it's not at the level it should be. And when you speak to teachers, some of them think they know it's an important thing, but because there's no qualification attached to it, unfortunately,
it's ignored. Yeah,
it's just there isn't. I don't think it necessarily gets ignored. I just feel like there's not the capacity to deliver it. And the time is so critical to make sure that the students pass the GCSEs or the A levels. They've got to have enough time to do everything, and it just falls by the wayside because there isn't the time. If it was tested, potentially, maybe it's not even tested, but if there was if it was core and you had to do it nationally across a few year groups, maybe 7, 8, 9, that would give them a good understanding and underpin the knowledge they're going to need for life, because life skills is really important, as we know, and it's left to when you leave school to then find out. So it's not as good as it should be, but it could be better, and I think there are resources out there. It's just finding the right time to deliver it.
Doing it. It's like, I've said this before about when I was 16, left school, opened a bank account. I think about 15 and a half, we'd opened one with my mum. We didn't come from a rich family at all. We had no, financial acumen whatsoever. Yeah. We were, normal family, and we always struggled with money, and it was like, right, bank account, within 4 weeks, overdraft, £1,500 overdraft, and I was able to draw £800 of it at the age of about 16 to buy some alloy wheels for my car. And I was trapped. I was in that system very, very quickly. 17, you go get a job. Once I've got the job, I'll pay back that debt. And I was stuck in the system, stuck in it for way too long. Yeah. And I'm probably not the only one here that, that's done this story. There's some that get in it and never get out. Actually, it becomes a lot worse. And imagine just having that in a lesson. Here's what debt looks like. This is what interest looks like. Yeah. It's not free money. And the only people that were going to teach me was my parents. But the problem is my parents, who taught them and who taught them? Yeah. And you're right, it feels like it just needs, this gets spoken about all the time. Should we change the curriculum just a slight bit? We talk about Pythagoras and we speak about things that, it's funny, isn't it, on memes on social media, when was the last time you used algebra? And I get it. It's not about using algebra. It's about using your brain to think about solving puzzles. Yeah. But there is some reality in this that, yes, we should be doing finances.
Yeah, I think it's something that I would like to see change. I'm not really somebody that would ever shape a curriculum, but I think to have the input from the business side, it's really important. One thing that we do, though, as a trust is we offer work experience in the business teams. So for the students in the schools, they get access to the central team, which is not in a school. It's in the head office in Middlesbrough, and they can come and work with colleagues and find out a little bit more about that. So some of them, didn't know what we did, didn't know what that was, and that opened their eyes a little bit to then think, well, when I go to sixth form, I might actually learn about business now, and I might do that. And that gives them a different view on the world as such. And in apprenticeships as well, we do have business admin apprenticeships in the trust. If there's a role available, we do try and recruit to those. As and when. So there are opportunities, but it's not, as you say, it's not as great as we'd like it to be. And I think it's one thing that everybody cries out about, it needs to actually happen. At some point in the future, it should change, but whether it will or not, it all depends on who's in government, what policies they've got, and that's how it works.
It's almost like they need kids to leave school and get into debt. It's awful to say it, but they'd leave school, get some debt, that'll keep it all running. And you don't want to think like that, but it feels like, why are we not trying to change it? And
I had my eyes open, as I say. When I was 17 and worked in a bank, and I got there and everything was, it was credit checks. It was I didn't know what a credit check was, to be honest. I didn't know what it meant. And then as soon as I opened a bank account and I opened an adult bank account, you then get access to credit cards, and credit cards look like they are attractive to younger people who think, well, I'll go and buy some alloys. Those,
they were amazing alloys, by the way.
I bet they were, fantastic. Was paying for them for 5 years, but
my mum was, I think,
Yeah, so but those type of things are really important, education-wise, to give people those skills for life. It doesn't need to be, war and peace. It just needs to be information. It needs to be something they can actually tangibly learn in a condensed format. It doesn't have to be over a long period of time, but they do need to understand what it is. So if you can give them anything, that's what I've always said I would do, if to give something back, really, anybody that needs that support. So I enjoyed doing it while, the time I did it, and I did it again at the next secondary school I joined. I also had wind that I'd done this in the past, so I did it for about 3 or 4 months in that role. But it was different then, different environment.
Yeah.
Totally different world.
I was going to ask, to be fair, what would you change on the education system? I think a lot of it is always around finances. I'd like to teach more about money. Let's teach more life skills. Yeah. And, we're not far off. Because I like it, I was a fan of school. I liked the setup. I liked the system, But it just needed tweaking. It's been the same old thing. You don't actually learn them skills till you go off to university, but not everyone goes to uni. People finish school at 15 like me. And went to go work in McDonald's. That was me. I'm like, I had a different story, and I just think that,
everybody's different on it. But I think the key thing is that everybody is different, and you shouldn't have to be, one size doesn't fit all. You should have opportunities. So there are different routes now and pathways and things that people can actually do differently, probably from when I was at school. But the life skills bit is a gap, and I feel like it's missing. There are lots of things that education does well, but there are some opportunities to develop further, and hopefully with a different direction, the new government might take in a different direction, and focus on those things.
Just moving on, being on the business side of things, talking about things that we should learn. Are you implementing any AI into your business, and have you tested any?
So it's something I'm very keen to explore further. We do have a lot of things that I suppose you wouldn't necessarily have termed AI previously, but they are digital systems that we use across the trust. So because it's 38 schools, for example, they might have a compliance system. So for estates, we're going to roll it out into the business side, and that'll give you automated sort of live data in terms of every set time every week. This is what compliance looks like on the business side. We've got it on estates. We're going to do it on compliance for business. There's lots of elements within that. And it sort of generates tasks that employees should do, tasks that people need to complete, for example, are now automated rather than it being on a to-do list somewhere in a book that you never look at. And it's going to be system generated through emails, and it's going to alert the right people. These things take time to set up, but we do use Power BI quite heavily in the trust, which is able to extract data, whatever data you've got, and make something out of it, make it how we find out trends, look at the real analysis that will inform decision making going forward. So we use it for decision making, we use it for strategic financial planning as well, looking at what the consolidated finances look like across the trust. It's not my particular role, but in terms of the modelling that the finance team and the CFO do, they use a lot of that data. But the starting point for me is kind of looking at the data that we currently have and ways to improve it. Is all about efficiency, really. Can we make something more efficient, which will then give us tangible data? Because the data at the minute might be skewed because everybody does things a different way. So trying to make things consistent. So we are looking at ways to streamline systems and processes where it's all digital, and then we use the AI elements where it then almost becomes self-explanatory. You don't have to think about it anymore, because if there's a bug in the system, it's to do with the AI rather than the individual. Previously, you wouldn't know whether it was the system, the individual, or something else, because it was various formats, whether it's Excel, Google, system driven, or just paper based. As I've said before, there's a lot of different things going on in schools, and it's the same in every school I've ever worked in, really. Yeah,
it is. I'm a huge fan of it, just because of how simple it can make things. You can create a system and AI can write you policies within seconds. It can change. In fact, it's replacing a lot of people. You could get to the point where a lot of businesses, and we've seen this, businesses outside of education can run with a lot of AI. So it's very deep, and we're a bit off there, but this isn't slowing down.
Yeah.
So we either you either get on board with it and you embrace it, or you kind of get left behind, don't you?
Yeah, I think we have to embrace it, and we have to use it to our advantage as well. It shouldn't be a threat. It should be something that can enhance your role. So I don't see it as I think the worst example is probably in supermarkets now, where they used to have checkouts. They used to have people on the checkouts. There was hundreds of them. Then all of a sudden there was about 10.
Yeah.
And now there's one checkout and 100 of these self-scan tills.
Yeah.
And actually you can't get anybody to do anything because they're all too busy correcting people's mistakes on the till, and there's only one of them. So that's where I think they've got it wrong, personally. I think what we should be looking at is how do we make things more efficient with the same people that we do have, because we need to run the business side more efficiently. And it's not a criticism of anybody. It's just because it's fast paced, it's very easy to probably make a mistake that may end up, causing trouble later down the line. We need to look at how do we mitigate the risks now. But in order to do that, you need to have people who aren't always working 100 miles an hour, and they need time. So if they've got something that helps them along the way, and it could be as simple as a system that counts dinner money, for example. Now it's all digital, but when I was a business manager, it was all pound coins on the floor, and you have to get on your knees and find the notes that you've dropped. Now it's all digital. So even that, the people are still in the school, still doing their roles in the office, but the money systems are digital. So it then automates the debt that if there's anybody in debt, and from a school meal point of view, believe it or not, people do end up in that cycle as well. But it used to be very much sort of 3 weeks later when they'd find out. Now they get instant. As soon as it's updated, you've had a meal today, your child owes this much. As a parent, you get that live data now. So there are things we can do to enhance it without really looking at, in terms of job losses or cutting people. It shouldn't be about that. It should be about making things better with the resources that we've got. The only issue with some of the AI is, and particularly the systems, is the cost. So some providers will see school as a cash cow and say, well, we're going to charge you X, and it could be £100,000 because you've got loads of money, £80 million budget, what's 100 grand? Well, actually that is 2 classroom teachers for a year. We can't afford that. And that's the bit I think needs tweaking. I think it'll become more accessible once it becomes more affordable as well. But it only becomes more affordable if you've got the volume of people, because the investment that they have to put in to develop a system is a lot, so they've got to get the money back. But it has been known, some providers in certain areas within that, have used it to their advantage. But I think now with multi-academy trust, things are more consolidated. Yeah,
I guess this is your job. This is what you're here to implement and see. What's the future hold for you in the trust? Have you got any big plans that are coming up over the next 5 years, or is it just to keep doing what you're doing and keeping the standards high?
I think, my role is varied. Day-to-day changes. I am ambitious, and I want to be a CEO at some point. And I think what I would like to see changes is access to CEO roles for non-teachers, people who haven't taught a class. They don't necessarily have to be a teacher to run the business side and be a CEO, as long as you've got the right colleagues beside you with the pedagogical knowledge, and that can work. So one day, that would be an aim. But where I am currently in the trust, I think I'm looking to almost get it right first, because there's a lot of work to be done. We've been in 18 months, made some changes. There's a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of improvement that can be made from both me, and everybody on the team. And I need to make sure everyone's on the same page and that they're pulling in the right direction, and they're on that journey with me, and sort of developing as we go. And I've got a great team around me in terms of they've all got the right attitude, in terms of the passion for the role. They want to make a difference, to see what they do on a day-to-day basis that impacts children's lives, and that's really important. But there's always scope for improvement for everybody. And I think what we've done is brought in the CPD, which is mandatory as well. So all of my business teams have to complete mandatory training sessions during the year, and it's to make sure everyone gets the same level of training. The standards are then high because everybody's had the same level. And you might have somebody who's done the job 6 months and 20 years getting the same training, and to build up disparity. But actually it's to keep it fair and to keep it relevant, and things change on a month by month basis in education. Sometimes day by day something happens, and if you don't let people know in the right way, they could continue to do something that isn't right. So that's what I'm really keen on: coaching, development, mentoring, but looking at how we all improve.
Yeah, like that. That gives you a constant purpose, does that? Absolutely. You can never finish that goal of developing people. So really, really good point. And just finally, advice for people wanting to follow your journey. You're quite different in the fact that you were in an education establishment and you did it from a business point of view. But if people want to follow your path, any advice for them that you wish that you'd known back then that you know now?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. That the first thing is would be to go and have a look at websites in terms of where do you want to work in an organisation. If you're looking at a school role and they're part of a multi-academy trust, then what does that look like? Have a look at the website, see what's on there, see what kind of messages they're putting out on social media. Is that an organisation you would want to be associated with? If it's a local authority school, then speak to the school. They're always open in terms of willing to support people with local network groups as well. But something that I kind of found out about a few years after joining the profession was ISBL, which is the institute, the professional body for school business leaders.
Yeah.
I'm currently vice chair of that. I'm on the board of trustees since 2021, and they've got a raft of information. They've got support. They've got career pathways. So you can look at that in terms of where your starting point is. You can complete their self-assessment, which will say, these are the areas I'm really strong at. These are the areas that I could do with developing. What do I need to do to get there? And they can support you. And there's training, qualifications, everything in there. It's all there. But I think I didn't know that at the time. So I went into the profession without any qualifications, particularly working in schools.
Yeah.
And I've obviously over the years, I've done those qualifications. I've learned a lot from that, but I should have done it a lot earlier, because it would have made my role a lot easier at the time when I first started out. So ISBL is a starting point. And then I see the organisation, do some research, speak to people who are out and about working in schools, because a teacher's experience is very different to somebody who's in the kitchen or in the estates team or in the office. They're all different. They've all got their own unique stories. But what you do here is always the passion for working in education. They're really proud of working in education. Yeah. And if that's a place you want to be associated with, then they're the people you need to speak to find out what the environment's like first and foremost.
Yeah, good. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
No worries.
Really good talking to you.
See you soon.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, if you'd love to be a guest on here, please drop me an email at dn@charlesgarth.com. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.